No mind, no matter. No matter, never mind. Now, in those trenchant, brief utterances, we find a number of positions in philosophy of mind, a number of positions on the mind-body problem. No matter, never mind, is the classic materialist position. Absent material organization, material entities, there could not be mental life. No mind, never matter. This suggesting that the material world, to have any kind of existence at all, presupposes a thinking entity, or the realm of idea in which the material world might inhere, might derive its very being. Now, during the period after John Locke's influential essay, any number of scholars saw in it both skeptical and materialistic tendencies, and also found its empiricistic orientation all too radical. It seemed to underestimate the activity and complexity and creative power of mind as such. It seemed to be the old blank slate, tabula rasa, tabula nuda theory that just didn't match up in any way with the influential philosophers and their understanding of the facts of mental life. It also seemed to conduce to a kind of Gassendi materialism that certainly would be an insult to patrons of the faith and indeed to philosophers who, notwithstanding to the contrary one or another religious difference of opinion, thought that human mental life was simply more complex than any materialistic theory could account for. Now, Leibniz is one of the great figures in the history of philosophy. He was also a statesman. He was an inventor of the calculus, along with Newton, in that scandalous debate across the Channel as to questions of priority and even plagiary and all that. By the way, Newton's calculus and Leibniz's are different enough, so we know they weren't plagiarizing. Leibniz was a profoundly insightful man. His was a profoundly insightful mathematical mind, logical mind, and many of his writings would be foundational for probability theory. Indeed, he issued a veritable invitation to the development of probability theory when raising the question, as a good rationalist, raising the question, suppose you find yourself in a juridical or adjudicative context that's going to be settled on the basis of evidence. Well, of course, evidence is never decisive. Evidence never settles things once and for all. There could be no question about it. Now, what's the basis upon which a reasonable person will take a firm position given the fact that there is not absolute certainty in the circumstance? So you see, when you use weight of evidence in determining guilt or innocence, what is it you're doing? And I say some of the early developers of probability theory were responding directly or indirectly to questions of that sort that had been raised by Leibniz. Well, I say enough on that particular point. Now, Locke's famous essay, an essay on the human understanding, is seen by some as radically empiricistic. Leibniz's reply to it was in the form of what Leibniz called new essays on the understanding. And it was the death of Locke that had Leibniz withholding publication for a time. He was a man of scrupulous good taste and good manners. Well, the new essays are very interesting, and they do raise fundamental questions that are with us to this day. They constitute a formidable challenge to any radically empiricistic philosophy of mind. Leibniz takes Locke to be asserting, and I should point out, you don't actually find this sentence anywhere in Locke's essay, but Leibniz takes Locke to be asserting something that we can find in medieval philosophy. We can find it in the writings of Duns Scotus. He takes Locke to be saying that nothing is in the mind at all except what was first in the senses. The old medieval scholastic version I've quoted in a previous lecture, nihil est in intellectu, quod prius non fuerit in sensu. Nothing is in the mind, nothing is in the intellect, except what was first in the senses. It all begins there. There isn't any mind at all until supplied by the senses. Now I say, Locke did not say that. But Leibniz takes Locke's position to be advocating something like that. And you might then see in the traditional rationalist reply to empiricism, well, all you actually have to see to get the traditional rationalist reply would be three Latin words, and they are words used by Leibniz in his new essays on the understanding. If you say nihil est in intellectu, nothing is in the intellect which was not first in the senses, etc., then Leibniz's reply is nisi intellectus ipse, except the intellect itself. That is, unless there is already in place an organizing, integrating mind, aware of itself, a self-reflecting or apperceptive power, well then, experience would count as nothing. After all, the world of experience, so to speak, the world of potential experience, is just a barrage of incessant stimulation, having neither rhyme nor reason. We don't just associate things willy-nilly. The function of mind is to take the welter of potential experiences, select from that welter just those things that bear in some significant way on life and mind, and then integrate the information in the external world in such a way as to render the world and ourselves intelligible. Now, on Leibniz's account, Locke simply underestimates what really is constitutive of knowledge. It's not just a collection of sensations pulled together to form elementary ideas, then pulled together to form complex ideas. In his new essays on the understanding, Leibniz has his Theophilus putting the point this way, quote, "This tabula rasa is, in my opinion, only a fiction, which nature does not admit. Uniform things, and those which contain no variety, are never anything but abstractions," close quote. So Leibniz here is distinguishing between the sort of nullity that might be a useful concept in mathematics and what indeed is properly said about the mind. There can't be a mind that's empty. There can't be a mind that's ever simply a blank. Mind is an integrative, active, creative set of powers and potentialities. Leibniz wants to argue that the very concept of experience itself presupposes such activity, such self-reflection, such awareness. Perception itself is grounded in apperception. We not only see things and feel things and touch things, but we know that we're doing this. We have a self-reflective activity which cannot be the gift of experience, but is the necessary condition for there to be experience, for me to know that it's my experience. Perception, Leibniz argues further, is inexplicable on mechanical or material grounds. Now, his ideas on this point constitute a great force in the history of thought. Suppose we want to argue that elementary sensations constitute the basis of all mental life, and that these elementary sensations are pulled together by associative processes such as to form ever more complex ensembles of thought. Now, presumably, this is taking place because we're constituted the way we are, and because the nerves, the brain, and the like are able to do this kind of work. This seems to be implicit in Locke's essay, Dr. Locke's essay. There's nothing in Locke to suggest that this is being done in some other way. He's very much the biologically oriented philosopher. He's made this clear in the essay, that he will not try to solve what came to be called the mind-body problem, or whether the soul ultimately is a kind of matter, but there is little in his philosophy that would conduce directly against a materialist philosophy of mind. All right. Well, says Leibniz, this isn't going to work. We don't have to ask whether our biology is important, for this isn't a technical problem, it's a conceptual problem. Even ever the model builder, Leibniz suggests a thought experiment, and indeed, we can use it as a thought experiment. Make a device that functions the way we do. Make something like us, except make it huge. Make it so large that you can actually walk around inside it. You can walk around inside the head of the thing as if it were a kind of granary, Leibniz says, a mill. Now what do you see? Well, you might see threshing machines, all sorts of gearing devices with mechanical advantage making sounds and all that. But, says Leibniz, nowhere within this place will you ever see anything qualifying as a perception or an idea. All of the contents that we understand to be contents of the understanding, all of the perceptual experiences are, to use the technical term, qualia. Qualia, the actual feel of things, all of the properties of idea. None of this is going to be found anywhere within that machine shop. Let me stay for a moment with the idea of qualia. We say something has a sweet taste. Its sweetness is not there because there are sweet atoms or molecules. We say that something is a rich blue. There are not blue quanta. So the sweetness, the blueness, the high pitch, these qualia, these are ineliminably mental perceptual features, not reducible to or translatable into the language of matter in motion. Now, although Leibniz was not in any way skeptical about the world of physical objects, his most fundamental ontology leaves little room for corpuscles or atoms in the conventional sense. His theory here is extremely complex, but it's revealed with unusual directness in a letter that he wrote to a correspondent, Bücher de Volder. Quote, he says this: "Considering matters accurately, it must be said that there is nothing in things except simple substances, and in them nothing but perception and appetite. Moreover, matter and motion are not so much substances or things as they are phenomena of percipient beings, the reality of which is located in the harmony of each percipient with itself and with other percipients." Rather heavy, as they say today. Reality is not reducible to crude matter, nor is the ultimate explanation, even of physical events, to be rendered in terms aloof to perception or some mental kind of process. Leibniz's position here is going to survive any degree of complexity. However complicated the brain is, his critique remains the same. We can make the nerve endings as large as a house, but never see a perception or an idea. Leibniz's is the rationalist rebuttal of empiricism, according to which mind is active. Perception is grounded in a kind of apperception or self-reflecting power. A materialist reductionist strategy isn't going to work because when you finally get down to the level of corpuscles, you've lost all the attributes and qualities that are constitutive of mental life itself. It would simply be a non-starter. There is another and quite famous critique of materialism in all of its forms, not just as it might be implied by Locke, but as explicitly defended by Gassendi and by materialistic psychologists and philosophers ever since. This other critique is one advanced by George Berkeley early in the 18th century, and one that we will find resonating with what Leibniz attempted to convey in his letter to de Volder. Now, I once dared myself to get through a lecture on George Berkeley, whose dates are 1685 to 1753, without ever raising the question, if a tree falls in the forest and no one is there to hear it, does it make a sound? As you see, I've failed again. Well, first a few words about Berkeley. Native to Ireland and an honored graduate of Trinity College, Dublin, Berkeley entered the clergy and very late in life was honored by appointment as Bishop of Cloyne. He was also recognized by his contemporaries as preeminently qualified in his knowledge of science and mathematics, and especially the field of optics. He was among the first to set down the basic principles of monocular and binocular depth perception. He was also an expert on the subject of perspective. It was, as I've noted, late in life that he'd become Bishop of Cloyne. Too often this fact is presented as a way of explaining his philosophy, which I think is always mistaken. There is no doubt about the sincerity of Berkeley's Christian convictions, nor does he conceal them in his writing. But as regards his philosophical and scientific writings, they stand on their own, no more or less worthy, whatever aims Berkeley might have had in mind in composing them. Enough said on that. That is to say, put another way, David Hume is quite famous as an agnostic, an atheist. The philosophical work of Hume stands and falls on its own without questioning what his private motives might have been vis-a-vis religion. Now, a systematic account of Berkeley's philosophy appears relatively early in his scholarly life, in 1710. He's about 25 at the time, and the work is titled A Treatise Concerning the Principles of Knowledge, and it's dedicated to the Earl of Pembroke by, quote, an obscure person who has not the honor to be known to your lordship, close quote. Berkeley here is seeking Pembroke as a patron and promises his lordship and his readers that his treatise will answer the growing skeptical and materialistic philosophies of the time, so threatening to good sense and to the faith. The metaphysical culprit in all this surely is materialism, and if it is defeated at all, it becomes a mere figment of the philosopher's incautious imagination. That is, to put an end to radical materialism is to show what it was all the time, namely a figment in the overly exercised imagination of philosophers. Berkeley's treatise, then, is to establish that materialism is simply untenable as a metaphysics. It's untenable as an ontology. Alas, not only is materialism not the best explanation, it's fatally flawed as an explanation, even of the allegedly material world, which, as Berkeley will be at pains to argue, does not have an independent existence of its own. So, here the party is going to get amusing and a little rough. This is where we're going to worry about maybe trees falling in forests, no one there to hear them, and so forth. We want to be careful in developing this. Now, if you're going to pace students through an argument, the culmination or conclusion of which is a certain skepticism about the reality of the external world, I think the first thing you have to do is sort of nail them down to their chairs and tell them that you're going to present this in a very sober way, while arresting the very strong tendency, on their part anyway, to start giggling, and hoping that they can arrest their own strong tendencies to perhaps get up and leave the room. Now, because according to Berkeley, there seems to be at first blush no material world, we want to be sure that we're getting the argument right. Well, to begin, this is not what Berkeley said. His treatise begins with a common sense account of what we can plausibly claim to know about anything. So let's summarize the argument. First, it should be evident to anyone who takes a survey of the objects of human knowledge that they are either ideas actually imprinted on the senses, or else such as are perceived by attending to the passions and operations of the mind, or lastly, ideas formed by help of memory and imagination, either compounding, dividing, or barely representing those originally perceived in the aforesaid ways. So, hold on now. Main point being this. If you pay any attention to what's taking place in the mind as we canvass the facts of the external world, you see that what these things are about are recollections we have of experiences or current experiences. This much seems indubitable. Added to the great variety and number of ideas fashioned out of these perceptions and feelings must be, as Berkeley goes on to say, quote, something which knows or perceives them and exercises diverse operations as willing, imagining, remembering about them. This perceiving active being is what I call mind, spirit, soul, or myself, by which words I do not denote any one of my ideas, but a thing entirely distinct from them, close quote. Now this too seems to be unexceptionable at the level of common sense, and surely no cause for alarm about the existence of a material world. That is, at this point, if I can pause, just to say Berkeley's making a distinction between the contents of my mental life and myself. That is, I know these to be in my mind, and I am distinguishable from the things I happen to be thinking about. Every idea is somebody's idea, and my ideas are mine. There are no depersonalized ideas. Every idea is in some mind or spirit, some self. All Berkeley or anyone else can mean, therefore, in referring or writing on a table or smelling a rose, is that experiences of a particular kind are occurring and are inhering in the mind of the person having them. Well, this then leads Berkeley to his famous position on the theory that there is an independently existing material world, and he puts it this way, quote, "It is indeed an opinion strangely prevailing amongst men, that houses, mountains, rivers, and in a word, all sensible objects have an existence, natural or real, distinct from their being perceived by the understanding. But with how great an assurance and acquiescence soever this principle may be entertained in the world, yet whoever shall find in his heart to call it in question may, if I mistake not, perceive it to involve a manifest contradiction. For what are the forementioned objects but the things we perceive by sense? And what do we perceive besides our own ideas or sensations? And is it not plainly repugnant that any one of these, or any combination of them, should exist unperceived?" Close quote. Well, there it is, Berkeley's celebrated immaterialism. And he concludes triumphantly, quote, "Some truths there are so near and obvious to the mind that a man need only open his eyes to see them. Such I take this important one to be, namely, that all the choir of heaven and furniture of the earth, in a word, all those bodies which compose the mighty frame of the world, have not any subsistence without a mind, that their being is to be perceived or known, that consequently, so long as they are not actually perceived by me, or do not exist in my mind, or that of any other created spirit, they must either have no existence at all, or else subsist in the mind of some eternal spirit." Close quote. Well, against Locke's now seemingly odd division of qualities, Berkeley contends that the distinction is empty. The so-called primary qualities of extension, figure, motion, rest, solidity, or impenetrability, and number, no less than the secondary qualities of color, sound, and taste, well, these are all ideas. And as an idea can be like nothing but another idea, the distinction between primary and secondary qualities just collapses. Moreover, even if in some way there could be independently existing material bodies needing no mind as a condition of their existence, how, asks Berkeley, quote, "is it possible for us to know this? Either we must know it by sense or by reason. As for our senses, by them we have knowledge only of our sensations, ideas, or those things that are immediately perceived by sense. It remains, therefore, that if we have any knowledge at all of external things, it must be by reason, inferring their existence from what is immediately perceived by sense. But what reason can induce us to believe the existence of bodies outside the mind, without the mind?" Berkeley leaves no doubt but that once his thesis is accepted, the world remains as it has always been. It's not a fiction or a figment. It's filled with all the properties and qualities that have been seen and experienced from the first. The ideas we have include those of our own manufacture, such as daydreams or mere and fleeting notions. These, however, are weaker and more faint and unsteady, Berkeley says, than those arising from perception. Thus, our perceptions of the external world, I shall quote from Berkeley again, quote, "are not fictions of the mind. The sun that I see by day is the real sun, and that which I imagine by night is the idea of the former." Close quote. Against his critics, especially those who see in his metaphysics a challenge to Newtonian physics, Berkeley is reassuring. He's even a bit of a scold. His thesis does not, he says, quote, destroy the whole corpuscular philosophy and undermine those mechanical principles which have been applied with so much success to account for the phenomena, close quote. These phenomena remain utterly unchanged on the Berkeleyan account. All we mean by explaining a phenomenon is being able to give an account of the sequence of perceptual or mental events. The rest is bald hypothesis. Nor is there much to be forfeited in offering accounts that no longer seem naturally caused in the sense of mind-independent causality. Now, Berkeley on this point is especially suggestive in ways that reach ahead to issues that are of central importance in contemporary philosophy of science. He puts his case this way, as a gloss on scientific theories. I should underscore this, quote, "The connection of ideas does not imply the relation of cause and effect, but only of a mark or sign with the thing signified. The fire which I see is not the cause of the pain I suffer upon my approaching it, but the mark that forewarns me of it. That a few original ideas may be made to signify a great number of effects and actions, it is necessary they be variously combined together. And, to the end their use be permanent and universal, these combinations must be made by rule and with wise contrivance," close quote. This is a complex passage, but what's he getting at? The laws of science are really summaries of experience. Their reduction to a set of rules does not constitute the discovery of some real unperceived cause. So, Berkeley never said that there isn't a material world. In fact, he spent a lot of time developing remedies for the stone. He actually came to America to raise funds to establish a university in Bermuda. He thought he had to get education back on the right track. You better pick some place quite far removed from those centers of intellectual corruption, which just are the contemporary universities. This is an old idea. Berkeley was a man of affairs. He was not only Bishop of Cloyne, he was a teacher, a writer, a world traveler, a fundraiser. Berkeley, the university in California, is named after him. He's a celebrated person. He's also a critique of materialism and skepticism, especially religious skepticism, was one of his main objectives. He argues that the material world just is a congeries of perceived attributes. Absent perception, there are no attributes. Nothing is long, or short, or blue, or yellow, or sweet, or sour, except in so far as it is thus sensed. So for a thing to be, it has to be the actual or potential object of perception. Here's the maxim: esse est percipi. To be is to be perceived. Well, what about the dark side of the moon, Bishop Berkeley? Does it exist? Or the top of the highest mountain yet to be climbed? Everything that exists inheres in some mind as a condition of its existence. Thus, everything having real existence must be the subject or the object of some perception. And obviously, the ultimate percipient, so to speak, the mind in which all reality can be eternally inhering, is the mind of Him who made it all. So there is this happy confluence of metaphysical rigor and religious faith. Yes, he is the Bishop of Cloyne. Now, the peak of the tallest mountain yet to be climbed, like the core of the planets that will never be known, are to be understood either as imaginary or as real. If the latter, they must subsist in experience. They must subsist as the idea of some mind or spirit. For absent the realm of idea and spirit, there can be nothing else, because for there to be anything else would require that there be attributes without percipients. The material universe then subsists in the mind of Him who made it, but it also subsists in its parts and particulars, in the perceptions and understandings of those who have experience of the world. In any case, no mind, no matter.